There was a day in American history when the sun was told to wait. A single, forgotten Sunday afternoon where time itself was fractured, bent, and carefully stitched back together across millions of square miles of untamed land. Before November 18th, 1883, the concept of a shared hour simply did not exist. If you boarded a train in New York City with your pocket watch set perfectly to the local sun, by the time you arrived in Boston, your watch would be inexplicably wrong. The United States was a bewildering, beautiful patchwork of over 300 different local times, all dictated by the simple ancient shadow of a sundial in the town square. A clock in Chicago ticked entirely out of rhythm with a clock in St. Louis. Every city, every sleepy village, every distant frontier outpost lived in its own private, isolated bubble of time. But as the iron rails of the locomotive began to stretch like a vast spiderweb across the sprawling American continent, this chaotic symphony of hours could no longer survive. What followed was one of the most astonishing, monumental, and quietly profound shifts in human history. To understand how the modern world was born, we must travel back to a quiet, mist-covered evening in the late 19th century and step aboard a heavy sleeper car, waiting on the tracks of the eastern seaboard, ready to chase the setting sun into the vast, darkening expanse of the American West. The platform is bathed in the soft, flickering glow of gaslight. It is a crisp autumn evening in 1883. The air is cool and heavy with the comforting, rich scent of burning coal, damp pine, and the faint, metallic tang of oiled steel. Before you sits a magnificent steam locomotive, a towering beast of iron and brass resting quietly at the station. It exhales deep, rhythmic sighs of white steam that billow out and melt into the chilly night air. The heavy iron wheels are still, but there is a low, humming vibration running through the platform, a promise of the long journey ahead. You are guided by a conductor in a dark blue uniform, his brass buttons catching the dim light as he leads you toward the parlor car. You step up into the carriage, and the heavy wooden door clicks shut behind you, instantly muting the sounds of the bustling city outside. Inside, the atmosphere is utterly serene. The cabin is lined with rich polished mahogany and dark walnut, gleaming softly under the warm amber light of brass oil lamps bracketed to the walls. You find your seat, a deep, plush armchair upholstered in soft, dark green velvet that seems to absorb you as you sit down. The fabric is smooth and heavy, holding you in a gentle embrace. Outside the thick glass window, the silhouettes of passengers and porters move like shadows through the fog, their voices reduced to a low, unintelligible murmur. With a deep, resonant whistle that echoes mournfully through the city streets, the train begins to move. It does not jolt. Rather, it eases forward with a slow, heavy grace. You feel the deep, steady pull of the massive engine at the front, transferring its power through the heavy iron couplings. The station lights begin to slip past your window, slowly at first, one by one, and then with gradually increasing speed. The clatter of the tracks establishes a slow, hypnotic rhythm. Click-clack. A brief pause. Click-clack. It is a mechanical heartbeat, a deep, grounding percussion that will carry you across the continent. You lean your head back against the velvet cushion and watch as the dense brick buildings of the city give way to the quieter, sprawling outskirts. The train crosses a long steel bridge over a dark, slow-moving river. The water below acts as a perfect black mirror, reflecting the scattered silver pinpricks of the stars that are just beginning to reveal themselves through the parting clouds. The sound of the wheels crossing the bridge changes to a hollow, resonant hum, a deeply soothing vibration that you can feel all the way into your bones. As the train leaves the city behind and enters the deep, quiet countryside of the American Northeast, the rhythm of the tracks smooths out into a continuous, lulling drone. The landscape outside your window transforms into rolling hills covered in dense, ancient forests. The trees are tall and solemn, their leaves painted in invisible shades of autumn, standing like silent sentinels guarding the edge of the tracks. The warm light from your cabin window spills out into the darkness, illuminating brief flashes of tree trunks and tangled underbrush, creating a mesmerizing, shifting pattern of light and shadow that plays across the glass. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the gentle side-to-side sway of the heavy train rock you. It is a motion as old as time, reminiscent of a cradle or a ship rolling on a calm sea. The warmth of the cabin wraps around you like a heavy woolen blanket. In the corner of the carriage, a small iron stove burns quietly, the soft crackle of the wood shifting and settling, adding another layer to the symphony of calming sounds. In this era, traveling across the United States is an exercise in profound patience and isolation. Out here in the dark, the miles stretch out endlessly. There are no instant messages, no glowing screens to distract the mind. There is only the journey, the steady progression of iron wheels over iron rails, and the slow rotation of the earth beneath you. You think about the men who laid these tracks, driving heavy steel spikes into the wooden ties by hand, conquering mountains, and bridging vast canyons to connect the two great oceans. Their labor has created this isolated sanctuary, this rolling room of warmth and comfort, moving through the cold wilderness. The train passes through a small, forgotten farming town. You open your eyes just in time to see a single lantern burning on the porch of a wooden farmhouse, casting a small pool of golden light into the surrounding ocean of darkness. It is a brief, beautiful glimpse of another life, out there in the quiet night, completely unaware of the precise time, living only by the dictates of the sun and the seasons. The town vanishes behind you, swallowed back up by the night, leaving only the endless stretch of track ahead. The problem of time, the grand puzzle that this very train is racing to solve, becomes apparent as you drift further west. Right now, in the conductor's pocket, rests a heavy silver watch. It is set to the local time of the city you just departed. But the engineer in the locomotive ahead has a watch set to the time of the railroad's headquarters. As the train moves across longitudinal lines, the position of the sun in the sky changes, and the local time of the towns you pass through slowly falls behind the time ticking away in the conductor's pocket. Every railroad company operates on its own time standard. There are over 50 different railroad times intersecting, overlapping, and clashing across the country. It is a glorious, chaotic tangle. Station masters have to maintain walls covered in dozens of different clocks, each labeled with a different railroad line, trying to decipher a schedule that reads like a complex mathematical riddle. The very fabric of American commerce and travel is teetering on the edge of utter confusion. The country is growing too fast, moving too quickly for the old ways of the sun. The solution, which is quietly unfolding in observatories and telegraph offices, even as you sit in this gently swaying carriage, is an act of almost unimaginable ambition. The entire nation is going to agree to stop the clock. You watch the telegraph wires outside the window. They run parallel to the tracks, dipping and rising between the tall wooden poles in a slow, endless wave, up and down, up and down. They look like the physical manifestation of a sleeping breath. Those thin copper wires are the nerves of the expanding nation. They carry the invisible pulses of electricity that will soon command the clocks of a continent to synchronize. Somewhere far away, in the quiet domed room of an astronomical observatory, a scientist is peering through a massive brass telescope, watching a specific star cross a delicate crosshair in the lens. By the precise movement of the heavens, they are calculating the exact moment of absolute noon. That celestial mathematics is translated into a simple electrical click, sent down the telegraph wire, humming through the cold night air, racing alongside your train, carrying the new gospel of standard time to every distant corner of the republic. The train begins a slow, sweeping curve around the base of a great forested mountain. The wheels sing a high, metallic note that harmonizes with the deep chugging of the steam engine. The carriage tilts ever so slightly, pressing you deeper into the plush velvet of your seat. The rhythmic sway, the warmth of the cabin, the heavy hypnotic beat of the tracks, it all conspires to pull you down into a state of deep, undisturbed relaxation. The world outside is vast and cold, but inside you're perfectly safe, perfectly still, moving effortlessly through space. You watch the smoke from the engine drift past the window, thick white clouds glowing in the moonlight, tumbling and dissolving into the darkness. The stars above are impossibly bright, scattered like crushed diamonds across the black canvas of the sky. They are the same stars the astronomers are using to tame the clocks, the same stars that have guided sailors and wanderers for millennia. Here, in the quiet heart of the American wilderness, they feel close enough to touch. You take a slow, deep breath, letting the steady rhythm of the train synchronize with your own heartbeat, settling into the long, beautiful journey across a country that is about to change the way it measures the very passage of life. The rhythmic, unbroken pulse of the iron wheels rolling over the steel rails continues to sing its low, metallic lullaby. You are traveling deeper into the night, deeper into the vast, sprawling expanse of the American heartland. The towering shadowed forests of the Northeast have slowly, imperceptibly begun to fall away behind you, surrendering to the wide open spaces of the Midwest. Out your window, the world has flattened into an endless dark ocean of sleeping prairies. The moon, full and heavy in the night sky, casts a pale silver wash over the landscape, turning the miles of tall windswept grass into a shimmering, rippling sea of shadows. Inside the parlor car, the atmosphere is a sanctuary of profound, undisturbed stillness. The heavy dark green velvet of your seat cushions you perfectly, absorbing the gentle side-to-side sway of the heavy carriage. It is a slow, rocking motion, back and forth, mimicking the gentle rhythm of a deeply sleeping breath. The brass oil lamps mounted to the polished mahogany walls have been turned down to a soft amber glow. They cast long, warm shadows that dance sluggishly across the ceiling with every turn of the track. The small iron stove in the corner of the car radiates a thick, comforting heat that wraps around your shoulders like a heavy woolen blanket, chasing away the cold autumn air pressing against the thick glass of the window. You watch the frost delicately blooming at the very edges of the window pane, tiny, intricate crystalline structures freezing in the moonlight, completely sealed off from the warmth of your private rolling haven. The deep, heavy thumping of the locomotive far ahead is a grounding, constant percussion. Click, clack, drift, click, clack, drift. It is the sound of miles being effortlessly consumed, the sound of the world turning slowly beneath you while you remain perfectly still, perfectly safe, and perfectly at peace. As you glide through this silver-lit wilderness, you begin to imagine the quiet, isolated lives passing by in the darkness just beyond the tracks. Every now and then, the train sweeps past a sleeping village, a small, fragile cluster of wooden buildings huddled together against the vastness of the American night. You see the shadowy silhouette of a general store, its wooden porch empty and quiet. You see the outline of a simple white church steeple pointing silently up toward the sprawling canopy of stars. Inside those darkened homes, beneath heavy hand-stitched patchwork quilts, the people are fast asleep. They are farmers, blacksmiths, shopkeepers, and schoolteachers, and they are entirely bound by the ancient organic rhythm of the sun. In these forgotten towns scattered across the map, time is not a precise, unified grid. It is a fiercely local, almost intimate possession. Consider the local jeweler in one of these sleepy towns. He is the master of the town's time. In the small square outside his shop stands a weathered stone sundial. Every day when the shadow falls exactly across the center mark, he knows that the sun has reached its absolute highest point in the local sky. That, and only that, is noon. He pulls his heavy brass pocket watch from his waistcoat, meticulously adjusts the delicate hands to 12 o'clock, and then uses that watch to set the grand ticking grandfather clock in his shop window. The entire town sets their lives by that one clock. The church bells ring based on it. The school doors open based on it. But this time belongs only to them. Just 15 miles down the dirt road in the next town over, the sun reaches its zenith a full minute later, and so their clocks are a minute behind. 50 miles further west, the clocks are 4 minutes behind. It is a beautiful, chaotic mosaic of thousands upon thousands of individual times, a nation where every isolated community exists in its own private temporal reality. But the heavy iron train carrying you through the dark is a machine that devours distance, and in doing so, it has shattered this peaceful, isolated illusion. As the railroads expanded, weaving their steel threads across rivers, through carved mountain passes, and over the endless plains, the chaotic patchwork of local times became an impossible riddle. Imagine the frustration of this station master trying to orchestrate the safe passage of these massive, hurtling iron beasts. A train leaving New York at a certain hour would arrive in Chicago at a time that simply did not exist on the local clocks. The railroads tried to fix it by establishing their own time. Over 50 different railroad companies operated on 50 different times. A major station in a hub city like Pittsburgh or Kansas City would have a wall covered in ticking clocks, each one bearing the painted logo of a different railroad, each one displaying a completely different hour. A traveler trying to catch a connecting train had to navigate a dizzying labyrinth of schedules, calculating the difference between local time, the time of the arriving train, and the time of the departing train. It was a recipe for missed connections, massive delays, and, tragically, catastrophic collisions on the single-track lines in the dark. The solution to this sprawling continental puzzle was quietly engineered not by politicians, but by a profoundly meticulous man named William F. Allen. As you sink deeper into the plush velvet of your seat, your eyelids growing heavy with the rhythmic swaying motion of the carriage, you picture him. You see a quiet, studious railroad engineer sitting in a dimly lit office in a busy eastern city, completely insulated from the noise outside. The room smells of old paper, leather bindings, and the sharp scent of black ink. A heavy brass lamp with a green glass shade casts a pool of bright light over a massive oak desk. Spread out across the desk is a giant, detailed map of the United States. It is covered in a confusing, tangled web of dozens of different colored lines, representing the overlapping and conflicting railroad times. It looks like a map of veins in a feverish body. William F. Allen sits in a heavy leather chair, a fountain pen in his hand, his eyes softly tracing the lines of longitude that slice vertically down the North American continent. He is a man who seeks deep, fundamental order. He understands that to tame the massive, wild expanse of the country, they cannot rely on the sun anymore. They need an invisible grid, an arbitrary but universally agreed upon structure imposed upon the turning earth. Slowly, carefully, with the quiet precision of a clockmaker, he begins to draw 4 thick, definitive lines straight down the map. He divides the vastness of the United States into 4 neat, rational compartments, 4 immense zones of time: Eastern, Central, Mountain, Pacific. He calculates that each zone should be exactly 1 hour apart, based on the specific meridians of longitude. Within each massive zone, no matter where the sun actually sits in the local sky, every single clock, every pocket watch, every station master's timepiece will point to the exact same minute. The sun will no longer dictate the hour. The railroad will. It is an idea so breathtakingly massive, so beautifully simple, yet it requires an unprecedented level of national cooperation. It requires millions of people to simultaneously agree to surrender their local, sun-given noon and replace it with a mathematically constructed noon transmitted across the country by copper wire. As the train banks slightly, navigating a long, slow curve through a shallow valley, the heavy sway of the carriage lulls you deeper into a state of somnolent peace. The sound of the wheels is a constant rushing sigh, carrying you effortlessly through the blackness. You think of the sheer, quiet magnitude of this endeavor. In order to make this new standardized time work, the entire nation has to be connected to a single absolute master clock. And that clock resides far away, in the hushed, deeply serious confines of the United States Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C. Imagine the observatory as it stands tonight, under the same canopy of brilliant stars that you're watching from your train window. It is a large, white building with a great, rounded dome, silent and still in the cool night air. Inside that dome, a massive brass and steel telescope points up through a slit in the roof, gazing directly into the profound black depths of the cosmos. The room is unheated, as the slightest distortion from heat waves could ruin the delicate observations. The astronomer working there wears a heavy woolen coat and thick gloves. The atmosphere is one of almost monastic reverence. The silence is absolute, broken only by the extraordinarily slow, heavy ticking of the astronomical regulator, the most accurate mechanical clock in the country, housed inside a specialized glass vacuum cabinet to protect it from changes in air pressure and humidity. The astronomer is not looking at the moon or the wandering planets. He is watching for a specific, distant, incredibly stable star to cross a microscopic crosshair etched into the lens of the telescope. Because the rotation of the Earth is the most reliable constant motion we have, the exact moment that star crosses the crosshair can be used to calculate absolute time with staggering precision. The astronomer's eye is pressed against the cold brass eyepiece. He waits with held breath. The universe turns silently above him, and then the moment arrives. The star aligns. He presses a telegraph key wired directly to his observing chair. That simple, sharp electrical click, dot, is the heartbeat of the new era. It is the absolute mathematically verified signal of time. That electrical pulse travels down a wire out of the silent observatory and into the bustling central telegraph offices. From there, it is amplified and split, sent racing out across thousands of miles of thin copper wire strung up on tall wooden poles that line the very railroad tracks you're traveling on tonight. The wires hum with invisible energy, carrying the new standard time across the mountains, across the sprawling plains, through the dense forests, and into every lonely depot and bustling city station in the country. You turn your head slowly against the velvet cushion, your breathing shallow and slow, entirely synchronized with the deep rhythmic chugging of the locomotive. You picture a tiny wooden railroad depot somewhere far out on the desolate Midwestern prairie. It is 3 o'clock in the morning. The prairie wind is howling gently around the eaves of the small building, a lonely, whistling sound that makes the isolation feel absolute. Inside the depot, a single kerosene lamp burns on a battered wooden desk, casting a pool of yellow light over a telegraph machine. The station master, a tired man with a thick mustache and a green visor pulled low over his eyes, sits slumped in his chair, half asleep. The only sound in the room is the incredibly comforting, rhythmic ticking of the telegraph sounder. Click, clack, click, clack, clack. It sounds like raindrops tapping against a tin roof. It is a mesmerizing, mechanical lullaby. The telegraph is directly connected to the wires outside, the same wires carrying the time signal from the stars. Every day, just before noon in the east, the entire telegraph network of the United States is cleared of all commercial traffic. The endless stream of business messages, personal telegrams, and news reports is abruptly halted. A profound electrical silence falls across the continent, and then the signal from the Naval Observatory begins to broadcast. The telegraph sounder in this lonely prairie depot, and in thousands of other depots exactly like it across the country, begins to tap out the seconds. 1 click per second, a steady, unyielding metronome counting down to absolute noon. The station master slowly opens his eyes, listening to the rhythmic clicking. He pulls his heavy silver pocket watch from his vest. He opens the engraved cover with a soft snap. He stares at the delicate hands ticking behind the glass. He waits for the final, distinct, long signal from the telegraph, the exact moment of the new, standardized hour. When it comes, a long, sharp, metallic clack that echoes in the quiet wooden room, he carefully adjusts the minute hand of his watch. He has synchronized his isolated outpost with the stars, with the observatory, and with every other railroad man across the sweeping expanse of the nation. The train's whistle suddenly blows, a deep, mournful, beautifully resonant chord that stretches out over the empty plains, echoing off the distant unseen hills. The sound vibrates through the floorboards of the carriage, traveling up through the soles of your feet and settling deep into your chest. It is a comforting, lonely sound, a reminder that you're moving, always moving, safely encased in this warm, rolling room of mahogany and velvet. You close your eyes again, surrendering completely to the heavy, hypnotic sway. The wheels continue their endless mantra, click-clack, click-clack. You are traveling toward Sunday, November 18th, 1883, the day the railroads have chosen to implement this grand sweeping plan. They call it the Day of Two Noons. The entire country has been preparing for it for months. Pamphlets have been distributed, notices printed in every local newspaper from New York to San Francisco. Jewelers and clockmakers are preparing for the busiest day of their lives. It is a monumental shift, asking the American people to let go of the time dictated by the shadow on their local sundial and to trust the invisible time brought to them by the copper wire and the iron rail. Some people are furious, claiming that the railroads are trying to steal time itself, trying to alter the very laws of nature and God by changing the hours. But the momentum of progress, the relentless heavy drive of the steam engines, cannot be stopped. The warmth of the cabin is absolute. The darkness outside the window is total, save for the pale sweeping glow of the moon. You feel an overwhelming sense of peace, a deep, heavy relaxation settling into every muscle of your body. You are completely untethered from the chaotic demands of the waking world, suspended in this beautiful, dark, rolling sanctuary. The history of the time change, the meticulously drawn maps, the cold observatories, and the tapping telegraphs all blend together in your mind to a soft, comforting blur. It is a story of how a vast, wild country was slowly stitched together by iron, wire, and a shared agreement on the ticking of a clock. As the train rushes deeper into the silent, sleeping heart of the American West, the rhythmic sway pulls you further down, wrapping you in a blanket of heavy, uninterrupted slumber, carrying you effortlessly toward the dawn of a completely new era. The slow, methodical ascent into the high, rugged foothills of the American West brings a subtle change to the deep, percussive rhythm of the heavy iron locomotive. The tracks begin to incline, weaving their way through deep, ancient valleys carved by long-forgotten glaciers, and the towering steam engine at the head of your train must work just a little bit harder. The rhythmic chugging deepens into a lower, more resonant, and profoundly powerful vibration. It is a slow, heavy, labored breathing of iron and steam, echoing off the sheer rock faces of the mountain passes. Chug, 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 a steady, unhurried heartbeat of incredible power, dragging your warm, deeply insulated parlor car upward into the thin, crisp, freezing night air of the high country. Outside the thick, double-paned glass of your window, the world has been swallowed by the immense, silent shadows of towering pine trees. Their massive, dark silhouettes stand like silent, ancient guardians watching the train pass, their heavy branches occasionally brushing against the side of the wooden carriage with a soft, sweeping whisper. It is a gentle, hush-like sound that layers perfectly over the deep, hypnotic humming of the iron wheels on the steel rails. Inside your rolling sanctuary, the atmosphere remains utterly untouched by the freezing, wild landscape just inches away. The deep, plush, dark green velvet of your armchair cradles you, molding to the contours of your resting body, holding you in a soft, heavy embrace. The small iron stove in the corner of the carriage continues to radiate its thick, comforting blanket of heat. You can hear the very faint, dry crackle of the burning coal shifting within its iron belly, a tiny domestic sound that makes the vastness of the wilderness outside feel even more remote and dreamlike. The amber glow of the brass oil lamps casts long, slow-moving shadows across the polished walnut and mahogany paneling of the ceiling. As the train sways gently from side to side, navigating the sweeping curves of the mountain pass, the shadows sway with it, creating a mesmerizing, slow-motion dance that heavily weighs down your eyelids. You take a long, slow breath, pulling in the faint, comforting sense of oiled leather, warm wood, and the distant, nostalgic aroma of coal smoke. You are completely safe, perfectly suspended in this moving capsule of warmth and stillness, drifting ever closer to the historic dawn of Standard Time. To truly understand the profound, almost surreal experience of what was about to happen across the United States, we must leave the quiet darkness of the high mountain pass for just a moment and travel back eastward to the crisp, bright morning of Sunday, November 18th, 1883. The railroad executives, the astronomers, and the meticulous planners like William F. Allen had chosen a Sunday for a very specific, carefully considered reason. Sunday was the day of rest. The bustling, chaotic, heavy machinery of American industry was temporarily quieted. The roaring factories were silent, the busy banks were locked, and the frantic floors of the stock exchanges were empty. It was the one day of the week when the sprawling, rapidly expanding nation slowed its frantic pace, took a deep breath, and rested. If you were going to attempt something as wildly ambitious and unprecedented as stopping the very flow of time, if you were going to ask millions of people to simultaneously alter their perception of reality, it had to be done on a day of quiet stillness. Imagine a misty, cold Sunday morning in New York City. The sun is just beginning to rise over the cold, gray waters of the Atlantic, casting a pale golden light across the cobblestone streets and the tall brick facades of the buildings. The air is sharp and deeply cold, carrying the faint, salty scent of the ocean and the smell of wood smoke drifting up from thousands of residential chimneys. The streets, normally clogged with the deafening clatter of horse-drawn carriages, heavy freight wagons, and shouting street vendors, are beautifully, peacefully empty. The only sounds are the distant, gentle ringing of church bells calling the early congregations to service, and the soft, rhythmic clopping of a single milkman's horse making its slow rounds down the avenue. It is a morning of profound, heavy tranquility, but beneath this calm, sleepy surface, a quiet, meticulously orchestrated revolution is about to take place. All across the city, and indeed all across the eastern seaboard in cities like Boston, Philadelphia, and Baltimore, the local jewelers and watchmakers have been awake since long before the dawn. These quiet, meticulous men in their heavy woolen vests and small, round spectacles are the undisputed masters of the day. Their shops are sanctuaries of microscopic precision, filled with the collective, mesmerizing ticking of hundreds of clocks. Imagine stepping into one of these small, warmly lit shops on Broadway. The air inside is warm and smells faintly of brass polish, fine machine oil, and aged oak. The walls are completely covered in beautifully crafted timepieces. There are grand, towering grandfather clocks with heavy brass pendulums swinging in slow, hypnotic arcs. Tick-tock, tick-tock. There are delicate porcelain mantel clocks chiming softly, and velvet-lined display cases filled with hundreds of silver and gold pocket watches, each one a tiny, intricate universe of perfectly balanced gears and hairsprings. The jeweler stands behind his heavy glass counter, a jeweler's loupe pressed firmly into his eye, examining the delicate sweeping second hand of his master chronometer. This is the most accurate clock in his shop, the one by which all other clocks are set. For weeks, the newspapers have been filled with complex diagrams and lengthy, detailed instructions on how the transition to standard time will occur. The public has been told to gather at their local jewelers or to watch the grand clock towers of the city halls and train stations. As the morning slowly stretches toward noon, a quiet, curious crowd begins to gather on the cold cobblestone sidewalk outside the shop's large glass window. Men in heavy wool overcoats and bowler hats pull their own pocket watches from their waistcoats. The watches are heavy, solid objects, deeply personal possessions often passed down from fathers to sons. They hold them in their gloved hands, their thumbs resting lightly on the grooved, winding crowns, waiting in hushed, expectant silence. The psychological weight of this moment is entirely fascinating. For their entire lives and for the thousands of years of human history that preceded them, noon was an absolute, undeniable physical reality. Noon was the exact singular moment when the sun reached its absolute highest point in the sky, directly above their heads. It was a truth dictated by the heavens, impossible to argue with, impossible to change. But today, they are being asked to sever that ancient organic connection to the sun. They are being asked to embrace a new artificial noon, a time constructed by mathematics, drawn on a map, and delivered by an invisible electrical pulse traveling through a copper wire. It is an extraordinary leap of faith, a collective agreement to live within a shared imaginary framework for the sake of unity and progress. As the local sun-dictated time approaches 12 o'clock, the atmosphere in the telegraph offices across the country becomes thick with a heavy, focused anticipation. In the massive, multi-story headquarters of the Western Union Telegraph Company, the sprawling operations room is bathed in the soft, diffused light of the morning sun streaming through tall, arched windows. Hundreds of wooden desks are arranged in perfectly neat, endless rows. On a normal day, this room is a deafening, chaotic cacophony of clicking brass keys as operators frantically send and receive thousands of messages. But today, as the clock edges toward the appointed hour, a deep, beautiful, almost reverent silence falls over the entire room. The operators, men and women who possess the unique ability to read the invisible language of electricity, sit quietly at their stations. Their hands are still, resting gently on the cool, polished mahogany of their desks. They are waiting for the central wire, the direct line connected all the way back to the silent, cold dome of the United States Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C. At exactly 3 minutes and 20 seconds before the new Eastern Standard noon, the vast Continental Telegraph Network is completely cleared of all commercial traffic. The endless flow of telegrams concerning grain prices in Chicago, shipping manifests in Boston, and personal greetings in Philadelphia simply stops. A profound electrical quiet sweeps across the sprawling expanse of the nation. It is as if the entire country has collectively held its breath. And then the signal begins. From the master clock in the Naval Observatory, a steady rhythmic pulse is transmitted over the wires. It arrives in the Western Union building with a sharp, distinct, metallic click. Click. A pause of exactly 1 second. Click. Another pause. Click. The sound is amplified and broadcast across a massive room. It is a slow, unyielding, hypnotic metronome. It sounds exactly like the slow, heavy dripping of water in a vast, empty cavern. Every operator in the room watches the large, white-faced clock mounted high on the wall, listening to the rhythmic clicking of the stars being translated into electricity. In the jewelry shops, the telegraph sounders hidden beneath the counters begin to tap out the exact same rhythm. The jewelers raise their hands, signaling for silence among the crowds gathered outside their windows. The men in the bowler hats look down at their pocket watches, the heavy silver casings cool against their palms, watching the delicate second hands sweep in tiny, jerky circles perfectly synchronized with the beating of their own hearts. The mechanism of the change, the day of two noons, was beautifully complex in its execution. Because the new Eastern Standard Time was based on the 75th meridian, which runs roughly through Philadelphia, the actual adjustment required varied depending on exactly where you were standing. In New York City, the local sun time was slightly ahead of the new standard time. So, when the local clocks reached what used to be exactly 12 p.m., the old familiar noon, the church bells began to ring out across the city. The deep, heavy bronze bells in the towering steeples of Trinity Church and St. Paul's Chapel swung heavily, their enormous weight pulling on thick hemp ropes, sending out massive, resonant waves of sound that echoed down the quiet, empty streets of Wall Street and Broadway. It was the first noon, the sun noon. But this time, the ringing of the bells did not signal the turning of the day. The people standing in the squares, holding their watches, did not put them away. They waited. They listened to the slow, steady clicking of the telegraph sounders continuing their countdown. They waited for 4 entire surreal minutes. For 4 minutes, time seemed to simply hang suspended in the cold autumn air. It was a bizarre, floating sensation, a brief, dreamlike period where the old world had ended and the new world had not yet officially begun. The hands on the great clock faces of the city halls and the train stations were physically grabbed by the clock keepers, thick, calloused hands resting on the massive iron gears behind the dials, holding the massive minute hands perfectly still. They were manually stopping the flow of time. And then the final continuous unbroken electrical signal arrived from the observatory. It was a long, sharp, definitive clack that echoed through every telegraph office and jewelry shop from Maine to Florida. The new, mathematically perfect Eastern Standard noon had arrived. Immediately the jewelers reached out and adjusted the minute hands on their master chronometers, pushing them backward exactly 4 minutes. The men on the streets did the same. A chorus of tiny metallic clicks as hundreds of watch crowns were turned, winding the hands backward, actively erasing 4 minutes of history, 4 minutes that they had already lived. The clock keepers released the massive iron gears, and the giant hands on the clock towers jumped to their new permanent positions. The church bells, which had just finished ringing their deep 12-chime chorus, suddenly began to ring all over again, a second set of 12 massive resonant tolls rolling over the city rooftops. The second noon, standard noon. The transition was complete. Further west, the experience was even more dramatic. In Chicago, the great bustling hub of the Midwest, the difference between their old local time and the new Central Standard Time was much larger. As you rest in the deep velvet of your train seat, rolling effortlessly through the dark, high country of the Rockies, you can almost see the massive, chaotic train yards of Chicago on that historic Sunday morning. The yards are filled with hundreds of dormant steam engines, quietly hissing white steam into the freezing morning air. The station masters stand on the wooden platforms, heavy wool coats pulled tight against the wind from Lake Michigan. They are staring up at the massive, multi-faced clock tower that dominates the station. In Chicago, the new Central Standard Time was 9 minutes and 32 seconds slower than their local sun time. Imagine the surreal experience of the passengers waiting in the grand echoing hall of the station. At exactly 12 p.m. local time, the great clock began to chime. But just as the final resonant bell faded into silence, the station master gave a sharp signal. A worker, positioned high up inside the clock tower among the massive turning brass cogs, grabbed the enormous minute hand and physically hauled it backward, dragging it back down the face of the dial, past the 12, past the 11, coming to a rest at exactly 9 minutes before the hour. The people in the station watched in hushed amazement as time literally flowed backward before their eyes. They had to sit on their wooden benches and simply wait for almost 10 minutes to live through the exact same period of time they had just experienced. It was an incredibly peaceful, forced pause in the frantic rush of their lives, a moment to simply sit and breathe and watch the slow, heavy sweep of the minute hand retrace its path. There was remarkably little panic, despite the dire warnings of a few newspaper editorials claiming that the railroads were robbing the people of their God-given daylight. The vast majority of the American public accepted the transition with a calm, curious fascination. It was a testament to the heavy, undeniable logic of the iron rails. The country had grown too interconnected, too dependent on the swift, reliable movement of goods and people to remain fractured by thousands of different local clocks. The people adjusted their pocket watches, the jewelers reset their window displays, and the massive, sprawling machinery of the United States simply fell into a new, unified rhythm. As you lie perfectly still in your heavy, swaying parlor car, the hypnotic rhythm of the train wheels seems to echo the ticking of those millions of synchronized watches. Click, clack. Tick-tock, click-clack, tick-tock. The deep, heavy thumping of the locomotive engine pulling you up the mountain pass is a powerful, grounding sound that drowns out all other thoughts. You're moving across the invisible, mathematically drawn lines that now divide the continent. You're passing from Central Time into Mountain Time. But there is no bump, no physical barrier, no sudden shift in the darkness outside your window. The transition is completely seamless, entirely invisible. The stars above remain the same, indifferent to the massive, complex grids drawn by men. The cabin of the train is an island of pure, uninterrupted comfort. The deep, plush velvet of your seat feels incredibly heavy, incredibly soft, pulling you down deeper and deeper into a state of profound relaxation. Your breathing has slowed to perfectly match the gentle rocking sway of the carriage. Back and forth, back and forth. The warmth of the iron stove is a heavy, invisible blanket wrapped securely around your shoulders. You watch the frost continuing to build on the very edges of the window pane, intricate, feathery patterns of ice crystals freezing into the moonlight, perfectly isolated from the deep, soothing warmth of your cabin. The history of that Sunday morning, the jewelers, the stopped clocks, and the double-ringing church bells slowly begins to fade, dissolving into a soft, blurry, comforting thought. The story of standard time is not a story of loud battles or sudden violent revolutions. It is a slow, methodical, deeply quiet story of a nation agreeing to synchronize its pulse. It is the story of telegraph keys tapping softly in empty rooms, of astronomers waiting patiently in freezing domes for a single star to cross a lens, of station masters carefully turning the tiny brass crowns of their silver pocket watches in the quiet hours of the night. It is a massive continent-spanning achievement accomplished entirely through silence, patience, and the gentle rhythmic turning of delicate gears. You let your head sink even heavier into the soft cushion behind you. The darkness inside the cabin feels incredibly thick, incredibly safe. The sound of the train wheels is a continuous, rushing sigh, a powerful mechanical lullaby carrying you effortlessly through the vast, empty spaces of the American West. There is nothing you need to do, absolutely nowhere you need to be, and no schedule you need to keep. Time in this perfect rolling sanctuary belongs entirely to you. You are simply drifting, suspended in warmth and motion, moving steadily through the deep, quiet night, completely surrendered to the heavy, beautiful, and profoundly peaceful rhythm of the journey. As the heavy iron wheels of the locomotive carry you deeper into the high, rugged majesty of the Rocky Mountains, the transition across the invisible, mathematically drawn border into Mountain Standard Time is completely silent. There is no physical marker out there in the freezing, snow-dusted wilderness, no towering monument to signify that the hour has suddenly shifted. The tall, ancient pine trees standing solemn watch over the tracks do not care about the meridians of longitude. The deep, frozen rivers winding their way through the bottoms of the dark canyons below do not alter their slow, icy flow. The landscape remains incredibly vast, untamed, and perfectly indifferent to the meticulous calculations of the railroad engineers. Yet, inside the warm, softly illuminated corridor of your rolling parlor car, the shift is acknowledged with the smallest, most intimate of gestures. You hear the incredibly faint, muffled footsteps of the Pullman conductor walking slowly down the narrow, carpeted hallway outside your private door. His steps are measured and steady, perfectly balanced against the gentle side-to-side sway of the train. He pauses at the end of the car, standing beneath a dim, amber-colored brass gas lamp. You can picture him reaching into the deep pocket of his dark blue uniform, pulling out a heavy, gold-plated railroad chronometer. With a soft, metallic snap that barely registers above the rhythmic humming of the wheels, he opens the engraved hunter case. He stares at the delicate black hands resting against the pristine white enamel dial, and then, with a slow, deliberate turn of his thumb and forefinger on the winding crown, he rolls the minute hand exactly 1 hour backward. Click, click, click. The tiny brass gears inside the watch case engage in a microscopic ballet, realigning the conductor's reality with the new sweeping grid of the American West. He has just reclaimed an hour of the night. He snaps the case shut, slides it back into his pocket, and continues his slow, quiet patrol down the length of the sleeping train. You sink even deeper into the plush, dark green velvet of your seat. The fabric feels incredibly heavy and luxurious against your tired muscles, absorbing every vibration of the tracks. The small iron stove in the corner of your cabin is radiating a thick, steady, beautiful heat that makes your eyelids flutter and droop. The frost on the edges of the window pane has grown thicker now, transforming into elaborate, feathery ferns of white ice that completely obscure the corners of the glass. A stark reminder of the bitter, freezing air rushing past the train outside. But in here, you're perfectly insulated, completely detached from the harsh elements, suspended in a timeless floating bubble of warmth and slow, mechanical motion. While the majority of the massive American continent surrendered to the undeniable logic of the railroad's new standard time on that quiet Sunday in November of 1883, the transition was not entirely universal. As your train glides smoothly across a high, snow-covered plateau, the rhythmic chugging of the steam engine leveling out into a deep, continuous purr, you drift into thoughts of the beautiful, stubborn pockets of resistance that refuse to let go of the sun. The idea of standard time was, to some fiercely independent communities, an unnatural imposition, a bizarre, invisible framework forced upon them by distant corporations in eastern cities. They believed deeply that noon was a divine occurrence, a moment dictated by the heavens, and they referred to their local sun time with deep reverence as God's time. Imagine a bustling, snowy evening in the city of Detroit, Michigan, several years after the rest of the country had adopted the new time zones. The city sits on the edge of a massive, frozen river, the air thick with the smell of wood smoke and roasted chestnuts. Horse-drawn sleighs glide silently down the snow-packed avenues, the gentle, silver jingling of their harness bells mixing with the low, steady murmur of the crowds bundled in heavy wool coats. Detroit was a city that looked at the new Central Standard Time, which would have pushed their clocks back a full 28 minutes, and simply said no. The city council, fiercely protective of their local autonomy, passed ordinances demanding that the city run strictly on local Detroit time. For years, this created an incredibly quirky, confusing, and somewhat charming dual reality within the city limits. Imagine a weary traveler arriving at the grand brick-faced Michigan Central Railroad Depot. The massive clock on the wall of the station, controlled by the railroad telegraph, reads precisely 12 p.m. Central Standard Time. The traveler checks his bags, walks out the heavy oak doors of the station, and steps onto the snowy cobblestone street. He looks up at the towering, ornate clock face of the Detroit City Hall just a few blocks away. The heavy iron hands of the civic clock proudly display 12:28 p.m. The traveler has walked out of the station and instantly lost nearly half an hour. This peaceful rebellion meant that the citizens of Detroit had to live in a constant state of mild temporal translation. Factories ran on local sun time, meaning the piercing shriek of the steam whistles calling the workers to the line echoed across the rooftops at odd, unaligned intervals compared to the arriving freight trains. Schools opened on Detroit time, but the post office, being a federal entity, operated on standard time. A mother in a warm brick townhouse would have a beautiful wooden mantel clock in her parlor, ticking away to the rhythm of the local sun, while the heavy pocket watch her husband carried to his job at the rail yard ticked exactly 28 minutes behind. It was a city living completely out of phase with the vast iron network surrounding it, a beautiful, stubborn island of sun worshippers surrounded by an ocean of mechanized, standardized hours. The mayor of the city even famously threatened to have the local police arrest anyone who attempted to change the great clock on City Hall to the new railroad time. It became a point of massive local pride, but the heavy, relentless pressure of American commerce is a difficult tide to swim against. The constant confusion of missed deliveries, misaligned appointments, and frustrated travelers slowly began to erode the city's resolve. Yet, they did not simply surrender immediately. In a wonderfully bizarre compromise for a brief period, the city of Detroit actually attempted to split the difference, creating a third utterly unique time zone just for themselves that was exactly halfway between the sun and the railroad. As the train banks gently, leaning into a long, sweeping curve around a frozen mountain lake, you smile at the thought of those fiercely stubborn town councils debating the very nature of time in warm, wood-paneled municipal halls. The slow, heavy rocking of the carriage lulls you into a state of deep, hypnotic comfort. The wheels sing their endless metallic lullaby, click-clack, drift, click-clack, drift. Eventually, of course, the resistance faded. The sheer convenience of a unified schedule became too powerful to ignore. The holdout towns, one by one over the next few decades, quietly walked into their town squares, unlocked the glass doors of their civic clocks, and gently pushed the heavy iron hands into alignment with the rest of the nation. The sun relinquished its ancient control, handing the reins over to the steady, rhythmic ticking of the master chronometers. This massive shift in the American perception of time birthed an entirely new obsession with absolute precision. Before November 1883, if your personal pocket watch was 5 minutes fast or 10 minutes slow, it hardly mattered. The rhythm of life was loose, dictated by the slow crawl of shadows across a porch or the changing light of the afternoon sky. But once the railroads established standard time, the entire massive, heavy machinery of the nation relied on absolute, unforgiving synchronization. A difference of even 2 minutes between the watch of a train conductor pulling a heavy freight train out of a siding and the watch of an engineer driving an express passenger train barreling down the same single-track line in the dark could result in a catastrophic, deeply tragic collision of iron and steam. You close your eyes, the warmth of the cabin completely enveloping you, and you picture the quiet, meticulous, deeply serious world of the general time inspectors. These were men tasked with ensuring that the hundreds of thousands of railroad employees across the continent possessed watches that were as reliable as the turning of the stars. Imagine stepping into the incredibly quiet, dust-free workshop of a master watchmaker designated as an official railroad inspector in a bustling city like Cleveland or Chicago. The shop smells beautifully of pure, refined watch oil, aged brass, and clean linen. The inspector sits at a tall, heavy wooden bench, a bright, focused beam of light illuminating a small, pristine square of workspace. He wears a heavy leather apron, a jeweler's loop pressed tightly into his right eye. In his incredibly steady hands, he holds a newly manufactured railroad pocket watch, This is not an ordinary timepiece. It is a heavy, robust, beautifully engineered instrument of survival. To be approved for railroad service, a watch had to meet incredibly strict, demanding standards. It had to have a pristine, stark white enamel dial with bold, thick, black Arabic numerals, so it could be read instantly in the dim, flickering light of a locomotive cab at 3 in the morning. It had to have a heavy, winding stem positioned exactly at the 12 o'clock mark. Most importantly, it had to be completely immune to the harsh, vibrating, swinging environment of a moving train. The inspector opens the back of the watch case, revealing the incredibly intricate microscopic city of gears, jewels, and springs inside. The movement is finished with beautiful, sweeping circular patterns carved directly into the brass and nickel, catching the light like a precious gem. The tiny, incredibly delicate balance wheel is spinning back and forth in a frantic, microscopic blur, regulating the release of the massive mainspring's energy. Tick, 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 tick. It is a rapid, high-frequency sound, a tiny mechanical heartbeat that must never falter. The inspector places the watch onto a specialized padded testing rack. He tests the watch in 5 different physical positions: face up, face down, crown up, crown left, and crown right, to ensure that gravity does not affect the swinging of the balance wheel. He places the watch into a heavy, insulated box cooled by blocks of solid ice, and then into a heated oven, checking to see if the extreme changes in temperature will cause the microscopic hairspring to expand or contract, altering the time. A railroad watch could not gain or lose more than exactly 30 seconds in an entire week of grueling, bouncing, freezing, and sweltering travel across the American landscape. If it failed even by a single second, it was quietly handed back, rejected from the rails. Every 2 weeks, conductors and engineers were required to visit these quiet, brightly lit shops. They would hand their heavy silver or gold-filled watches over the counter to the inspector. The inspector would consult his master chronometer, the massive, highly accurate clock mounted to the wall, which was directly wired to the telegraph lines carrying the time signals from the Naval Observatory. He would compare the time on the massive clock to the time on the pocket watch. He would carefully record the variation in a heavy leather ledger book, noting whether the watch was running 2 seconds fast or 3 seconds slow. He would issue a small printed certificate of health for the watch, a little piece of paper that allowed the engineer to safely take control of his massive steam locomotive for another 14 days. The sheer, monumental scale of this synchronized effort is deeply soothing to think about. Tens of thousands of men scattered across millions of square miles of deserts, mountains, forests, and sprawling plains, all carrying small ticking brass instruments in their pockets, all perfectly aligned to the exact same invisible second. It was a massive, intricate web of mechanical trust that allowed the nation to safely conquer the vastness of its own geography. Your train begins a long, slow descent out of the high peaks of the Rockies. The heavy labored chugging of the steam engine eases back, transitioning into a smooth, effortless rolling coast. The sound of the wheels changes pitch, becoming a lighter, more rhythmic hum as gravity gently pulls the massive iron carriages down the sweeping curves of the mountain pass. The gentle side-to-side sway of your parlor car becomes even more pronounced, a beautiful, sweeping, cradle-like motion that rocks you gently against the thick velvet cushions. The iron stove crackles softly, a tiny, comforting pop of a burning coal breaking apart, releasing another wave of deep, heavy warmth into the darkened cabin. You look out the frosted window, wiping a tiny circle of clear glass with the soft sleeve of your shirt. The moon has begun its slow descent toward the western horizon, casting long, deeply shadowed purple hues across the vast, snow-covered valleys below. The world out there is completely silent, completely still, completely unaware of the strict ticking schedule of the iron rails. But in here, in this beautiful, floating room, time is perfectly measured, perfectly safe, and perfectly yours to ignore. You let your head fall fully back against the headrest, your breathing dropping into a slow, deep, unbroken rhythm, entirely synchronized with the gentle rushing sound of the train rolling endlessly through the dark, carrying you ever closer toward the final frontier of the American night. The long, incredibly slow descent out of the towering, snow-capped peaks of the Rocky Mountains is a masterpiece of mechanical grace. The massive steam locomotive at the head of your train no longer labors against gravity. Instead, it surrenders to it, allowing the tremendous weight of the iron carriages to pull them smoothly down through the winding forested canyons and out onto the vast, arid plateaus of the American Southwest. The deep, percussive chugging that defined the climb has completely vanished, replaced by a soft, continuous, rushing sigh as the steel wheels glide effortlessly over the endless ribbon of the tracks. It is a long, exhaling breath of a sound, a release of tension that you can feel echoing deep within your own resting body. The heavy, dark green velvet of your seat cushions you against the sweeping centrifugal force of the train, navigating the long, downward curves, gently rocking you back and forth, side to side, in a slow, hypnotic rhythm that feels perfectly designed to pull you down into a state of total, uninterrupted slumber. You are crossing the final invisible threshold of the continent. The heavy, polished wooden door at the end of your parlor car opens with a soft click, and the Pullman conductor steps inside once more. His brass buttons catch the dim amber glow of the gas lamps. He moves with a quiet, practiced elegance, his footsteps completely absorbed by the thick, patterned carpet running down the center of the aisle. He pauses, reaching into the pocket of his dark blue uniform, and retrieves his heavy gold pocket watch. For the final time on this incredible journey, he opens the engraved case. The delicate click of the metal cover is a tiny, sharp sound in the muffled quiet of the cabin. He stares at the white enamel dial, and with a slow, deliberate motion, he turns the winding crown backward one more hour. Click, click, click. He has just aligned the train with Pacific Standard Time. The final piece of the sprawling continental puzzle has clicked seamlessly into place. As the conductor slides the watch back into his pocket and continues his silent patrol, you turn your head heavily against the plush velvet headrest and gaze out the frosted window. The landscape has transformed once again. The dense, ancient pine forests have given way to the sweeping, silver-lit expanse of the high desert. The moon, now hanging low and heavy in the western sky, casts a pale, ethereal light over an endless ocean of sagebrush and smooth, wind-carved stone. It is a landscape of profound, ancient emptiness, a place where time seems to have stood completely still for millions of years. Yet, running parallel to your train, catching the moonlight on their thin copper surfaces, are the telegraph wires. They dip and rise between the tall wooden poles in that familiar endless wave, up and down, up and down. They are still humming with the invisible pulses of electricity, carrying the meticulously calculated time of the United States Naval Observatory all the way to the very edge of the Pacific Ocean. The story of how this invisible grid of time finally reached the bustling, foggy shores of the West Coast is the quiet culmination of the entire American expansion. Imagine the city of San Francisco in the late 19th century, a booming, chaotic metropolis built on gold timber and the massive influx of ships from across the globe. Before the telegraph wires successfully bound the nation together, San Francisco was incredibly, profoundly isolated from the cities of the East. It took weeks, sometimes months, for news, letters, and the accurate measurement of time to travel by stagecoach or ship around the treacherous southern tip of the continent. The city operated on its own distinct reality, guided by the sun burning through the morning fog over the bay and the ringing of the great bell in the ferry building. But as the transcontinental railroad finally bridged the massive gap, driving the golden spike at Promontory Summit and connecting the iron veins of the east to the west, the isolation was shattered. The arrival of Pacific Standard Time was not just a matter of adjusting the clocks, it was a profound psychological shift. It was the moment that the people of California, Oregon, and Washington truly, tangibly felt connected to the rest of the Republic. Imagine stepping into a bustling, ornate bank lobby in San Francisco on the day the new time was adopted. The room is filled with the smell of polished mahogany, brass polish, and damp wool overcoats. A massive, beautiful grandfather clock stands in the corner, its heavy brass pendulum swinging in a slow, hypnotic arc. Tick-tock, tick-tock. The bank manager, a man in a crisp suit and a heavy gold watch chain draped across his vest, stands before the clock. He is surrounded by a small, quiet group of tellers and clerks. They are waiting for the signal from the local telegraph office, which is directly wired to the lines stretching all the way back across the deserts, over the mountains, through the plains, and into the hushed, silent dome of the observatory in Washington, D.C. When the signal finally arrives, a long, sharp electrical click echoing from a small brass sounder on a nearby desk. The bank manager reaches out and physically moves the heavy iron hands of the grandfather clock. He aligns the West Coast with the East Coast. In that single quiet moment of mechanical adjustment, the sprawling, unimaginably vast distance of the United States is instantly compressed. A businessman in San Francisco now knows exactly, to the very second, what time it is in an office in New York City. The continent has been tamed by the ticking of a gear. The profound beauty of this massive synchronization lies in its invisible architecture. As your train glides smoothly across the desert floor, the rhythmic humming of the wheels creating a deep, resonant drone that vibrates softly through the floorboards of the cabin. You think about the sheer scale of the agreement. Millions of people, from the rugged lumberjacks in the damp forests of the Pacific Northwest, to the cattle ranchers on the open plains of Texas, to the factory workers in the crowded brick cities of New England, all unconsciously participating in the exact same mathematical rhythm. They all wake, work, eat, and sleep, guided by the exact same invisible metronome. It is the greatest, quietest, most peaceful revolution in the history of the world, achieved not with weapons or loud proclamations, but with incredibly delicate hairsprings, tiny brass gears, and thousands of miles of singing copper wire. The temperature outside the thick glass of your train window is plunging as you cross the deepest, coldest part of the desert night. The intricate, feathery patterns of frost on the window pane creep further inward, creating a beautiful, sparkling frame around the dark, empty landscape. But inside your rolling sanctuary, the warmth is absolute. The small iron stove in the corner is a beacon of heavy, comforting heat. The soft amber light of the brass oil lamps reflects warmly off the polished walnut paneling, creating an atmosphere of deep, undisturbed safety. The gentle side-to-side sway of the carriage continues its endless, cradle-like motion. It is rocking you. It is holding you perfectly still while carrying you forward. You take a slow, deep breath, pulling in the faint, nostalgic sense of oiled steel, warm velvet, and burning coal, letting the heavy, hypnotic rhythm of the train sink deeply into your bones. As the hours slip by, the deep black canvas of the night sky begins to soften. The sharp, brilliant pinpricks of the stars, the very same stars that the astronomers used to calculate the absolute truth of time, slowly begin to fade, dissolving into the approaching dawn. The train begins to climb slightly once more, leaving the arid desert behind and entering the long, sweeping, incredibly lush valleys of Southern California. The scent of the air slipping through the microscopic cracks around the window frames subtly changes. The sharp, dry cold of the desert is replaced by a softer, heavier air, carrying the faint, incredibly soothing scent of eucalyptus trees, damp earth, and, just barely detectable on the edge of the breeze, the salty, ancient aroma of the Pacific Ocean. The chugging of the locomotive deepens again, a steady, powerful, rhythmic heartbeat pulling you through the morning mist that clings to the valley floor. The mist is a thick silver blanket rolling softly over the endless rows of orange groves and dark green hills. The train moves through it like a ghost ship gliding across a perfectly calm sea. The light outside the window slowly transitions from deep purple to a soft bruised blue, and finally into a pale hazy gray. It is the dawn of a new day, measured and perfectly regulated by the master clocks ticking away in silent, dust-free rooms thousands of miles behind you. The journey of the timekeepers, the massive, chaotic struggle to tame the sun and impose a beautiful, rational order upon the wild American continent, is finally coming to an end. You imagine the countless intricate pocket watches resting quietly in the vests of the sleeping men across the country. You picture the massive, ornate clock towers in every small town square and grand city station, their giant hands sweeping in perfect, synchronized circles. You see the quiet, studious astronomers packing away their charts and turning away from their massive brass telescopes, their monumental task completed. They have given the nation a shared rhythm, a unified pulse that will carry it forward into the modern age. And as the heavy iron train finally begins to slow its pace, the rhythmic click-clack of the wheels lengthening out, becoming softer, gentler, more deliberate, you feel the final heavy weight of exhaustion wash over you. The train is approaching its final terminus, a grand, beautiful station situated right on the edge of the sprawling, misty coastline. Through the window, you can just make out the massive rolling waves of the Pacific Ocean crashing slowly against the dark, rocky shore. The sound of the ocean is a deep, resonant roar, a slow, continuous breathing that perfectly matches the fading hiss of the steam engine. The ocean operates on its own ancient tidal time, a rhythm dictated by the massive, invisible pull of the moon, entirely indifferent to the intricate gears and telegraph wires of men. The train glides smoothly into the covered platform of the station, the brakes applying with a soft, long, metallic sigh. The gentle swaying motion finally, beautifully comes to a complete stop. The iron stove in the corner of your cabin has burned down to a pile of soft, glowing red embers, radiating the last of its gentle, heavy heat into the quiet room. The amber light of the gas lamps flickers softly, casting long, still shadows across the deep green velvet of your empty seat. The journey is over. The continent has been crossed. The incredible chaotic patchwork of local sun times has been beautifully woven into a single, seamless, invisible blanket of standard time that stretches across the entire nation. You close your eyes, letting your head sink deeply into the soft, heavy cushion one last time. There is no more movement, no more rushing landscapes, no more ticking telegraph sounders. There is only the deep, profound stillness of the resting train, the slow, rhythmic sound of the ocean waves crashing in the distance, and the incredibly slow, steady beating of your own resting heart. The history of time has been written. The clocks are all perfectly aligned, and the vast, sprawling expanse of the United States is resting peacefully under a single unified hour. You are completely safe, perfectly warm, and entirely surrounded by a deep, heavy, beautiful silence. You let go of every thought, every lingering image of the iron rails and the shining pocket watches, surrendering completely to the heavy, comforting weight of sleep. The world is ticking perfectly without you, leaving you free to drift away into the deepest, most peaceful, and unbroken slumber.